Welcome back to the Juneau-Douglas City Museum and another episode of Guess That Object. I'm Niko Sanguinetti. I'm the Curator of Collections and Exhibits here at the City Museum, and today we're going to be talking about this object right here. So we did post a photograph of this on our Facebook page earlier this week and had people guess, and we did have some really good guesses. The trick about this particular object and why so many people have asked questions about it in our collection is mainly because it's a piece of a whole. So most people look at this object and think that this is it. It has to be something for listening, or I've gotten some interesting guesses about some kind of smoking apparatus, something along those lines. But when in reality, it's actually just a part of a larger object. So for the rest of this video, we're actually going to go further into our collection storage and get a look at the whole object. Come with me, let's go check it out. Here we are in the collection storage room under the Juneau-Douglas City Museum, and now that I have the full object here in front of me, I bet most viewers can automatically guess what this object is. It's very iconic, and there are still similar models out there today. So this is a phonograph. It's from around 1910 and is from the Thomas A. Edison Company. And the phonograph itself was invented by Thomas Alva Edison, and the patent was awarded in 1878, and was really the result of the telephone and the telegraph, which he had previously invented. And he had many goals for this sound recording system that he invented. It was not only meant to be used in houses for music, but also for recording meetings, for business purposes. He had a whole lot of lofty goals for the use of this technology. So the one that we have here is a couple generations removed from that very early model, and it is a standard phonograph. And what the piece that we were looking at earlier here, this is what connected the portion inside to the speakerphone, more or less. And you'll see here it was already designed for travel, and the top comes off, and inside is where you're going to have all of the pieces that work and produce the music. So we're going to take in just a minute a closer look at the inner workings of this particular phonograph, but the piece that we looked at before would connect here to this nozzle, and this larger area would connect to the base of the funnel here, which would be then used to project and amplify the music or whatever particular sound you were projecting from. And the phonograph is very interesting in that it was invented and it had a lot of popular appeal right off the bat. It was new technology, nobody had recorded anything like this before, and it was a huge novelty factor. However, they were difficult to use. The early phonographs really only could be used by experts. They quickly moved from a paraffin parchment style cylinder to a cylinder wrapped in tinfoil, which obviously didn't last very long. So really you had to be an expert to use it. It wasn't great for home use. It really could only be used in a professional capacity. And as today with any new technology, there's going to be a learning curve. So interest kind of waned within a couple of decades. By the 1880s, there was Alexander Graham Bell also was looking at a similar technology. He patented what he called the gramophone, which basically just improved on Edison's model, used the same type of mechanics, cylinder style, but better style cylinders with wax, and different types of styluses for reading, and kind of made a slightly better product. That's why you'll often hear phonograph and gramophone both used to describe these sound producing machines. And it kind of depends on where you're from to determine which term you use. There are obviously specific experts that'll say if it was made by Thomas Edison before a certain time, then it's definitely a phonograph. If it's made later, it's a gramophone. However, like terms like Kleenex or chapstick, a lot of these specific titles changed over time and with public consumption and became synonymous with just a music box. So phonograph, gramophone, kind of goes either way. Same with record player. But this, particularly because of its time period and because it's made by the Edison Company, we're going to always call it a phonograph. So let's take a little closer look at the inner workings of this particular phonograph, and we'll see how it functions a little bit better. So here we can get a slightly closer look at our phonograph. Now, as we saw in the larger shot, you can see where the horn would connect here, and this piece actually moves, and underneath is where you'll have your stylus, which would actually read the markings on the cylinder. And so a lot of people watching this video either grew up with record players or have seen them because they are coming back into fashion. This phonograph wouldn't have worked with flat circular discs. This is an early model which would actually use a cylinder. Fortunately, we don't have an example of one of those cylinders, but you can see exactly where it would lie on here. And to put it on, this little arm opens, you slide the cylinder on here, pop this back on, slide this down, and like a modern record player, you could slide the arm depending on where you wanted it to start playing. Generally, you want to start at the beginning, me personally at least. However, if you have that favorite song, you could always start it wherever you like. Most of these cylinders would have been playing 2 minutes. There were later models that would play up to 4 minutes. However, around 1910, a lot of them are going to be the 2 minutes. And so you don't really have a lot of time to play with. But once all that's set up, you generally would have the horn connected here. In the back area there is a crank, and all of the mechanics are actually inside the box here. So this isn't run by electricity or anything besides the clockwork mechanics that are inside. Unfortunately, this particular object, there is a bit of a malfunction with one of the latches on either side, so I can't actually open it up and show you the inner workings of it. However, you're just going to have to take my word for it. They are in there. And so the crank back here winds the gears, and actually when I was doing research on this object in preparation for this bit, I was fiddling a little bit with it to see how things opened, if things move. Obviously you never want to force something in your collection if it does not want to move, which is how I know it won't open, which is fine. However, I did notice when I turned the crank, it did actually play. So it obviously isn't going to play anything because we don't have anything on the cylinder and the stylus isn't down. However, somebody wound this crank once upon a time. I have not cranked the machine. I merely turned it on and accidentally gave it a bit of a push, only to find it still functions beautifully and turns. Obviously, you don't want to play around with it too much just in case, but the on and off still work really, really well. So always a little bit of a fun surprise here in the collections. You're never quite sure what you're going to find. We do also have here, unfortunately, I don't have the cylinder that went inside this case, but you do have one of the original containers for one of those record cylinders in here. So this is called gold molded, and this is one of the later stabs at the cylinders that were played on these phonographs, and they weren't made out of gold. However, they did become the gold standard for sound. And there are those in the music industry that still argue the cylinder ways of recording music is still the purest. I know a lot of people swear by the flat discs, but those, when flat discs came out in the 1890s, there were many purists who still claimed that the cylinders were the way to go. So what ended up happening to these cylinder phonographs? Like I mentioned before, there was an effort to move away from the cylinders to the flat discs. Emil Berliner actually is credited with inventing the flat discs, which came into use around that time period. By the 1920s, really, cylinder style phonographs were going out of fashion. The Thomas Edison company specifically was losing out to competitors because they weren't able to get the star quality celebrities for recording onto their technology. So it's kind of started to fade out. Thomas Edison himself let go of his company in the late 1920s. So that was really the end of the phonograph made by the Edison company. And after that, you see a lot less of the cylinders, a lot more of the records, which are now making a resurgence today. They actually remained the main source of home music playing until the 1980s. So from the 1920s to the 1980s, that's a long run for a particular type of music technology. In the 80s, they were kind of pushed out by cassette tapes, and now interestingly enough, are having a resurgence. So you can still go buy record players with the flat discs and buy current music in records. So there are those purists that say that is the best sound. However, when this phonograph was popular, there were purists that would argue actually the cylinder was better than the flat disc. So it just goes to show you, no matter what the technology is, there's always going to be a little bit of contention on which one is the best. So thank you for coming with us today and taking a look at our Thomas Edison Company phonograph, and which is lovingly still functioning. So stay tuned for our next episode, and as always, make sure you watch our other videos on our YouTube channel or our Facebook page, and if there's any particular items in our collection that you're interested in, or pieces of Juneau history, please send us an email, a Facebook message. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for coming to the Juneau-Douglas City Museum, and we hope to see you soon.